The medium of our time, electric technology, everything from the light bulb to the telephone to the computer to jets to nuclear energy, is changing everything. We are in the middle of a tremendous clash between the old and the new.
The medium does things to people, and they're always completely unaware of this. They don't really notice the new medium that is roughing them up. They think of the old medium because the old medium is always the content of the new medium, as movies tend to be the content of TV, and as books used to be the content, novels used to be the content of movies. And so every time a new medium arrives, the old medium is the content, and it is highly observable, highly noticeable. But the real roughing up and massaging is done by the new medium, and it is ignored. For centuries, the only kind of skill or grammar or literacy that was taught was that connected with the reading and writing itself. All the other skills and technologies of the environment were accepted as merely environmental and taken for granted. Today we have, because these things have stepped up in many of their developments, many of their manifestations, we have to understand the language and grammars of many media. And it is rather fantastic, isn't it, when you think of the number of hours that people spend in front of film or television, for them to know nothing about the processes of making these things, or nothing about the means available for themselves to express themselves. So the grammars of media has become, this area has become a new area of stress in education.
These are
you notice the combination of shapes that make up
these are
new
more
ones.
patterns.
Yes.
Than a whole lot of different.
There's only 4 different things in it, you know.
Yes, but they're making up
What's all
different
about?
patterns.
Yeah.
See, there's a bird shot.
Yes, it was. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
I think and I would never realize how many patterns or geometrical forms you could get out of one little square.
It's wonderful to see the results of those scratchings. They come out on the screen like Chinese, Japanese art forms. This is a tremendous discovery for the children, obviously, in the potential of a form right in their own hands. Like seeing oneself in print, like writing poems and seeing them published. Somewhat the thrill that the OK Moore children get in seeing themselves learning to read and write by actually publishing themselves as they go, by typing. But the McLuhan world makes a tremendous break with ordinary film in this way, that by painting directly onto the film, you make the audience, as it were, the screen, instead of making the audience the camera eye. And so the child then, by drawing directly onto film, has the sense of mastery over the whole world. It's like a composer writing a melody. He makes a world. The composer making a melody doesn't try to make a world that corresponds to some other world. He just etches or makes with sound a world. McLuhan, when he draws directly onto film, makes a world. He isn't photographing a situation which corresponds to some other situation. So this switch from matching to making is a drastic one in terms of the learning process. It switches altogether, again, from classified data, from mere matching knowledge, to a world of actual discovery and actual knowing of forms. I think you couldn't find a larger switchover in the whole history of education. We continue to talk about the mechanized culture of today. In fact, we have moved out of the mechanized world into the electric world without especially understanding the new dimensions of the electric world. It is one of involvement in the sense that people no longer merely are spectators of processes. They are very much now involved in processes, and therefore children love to get involved in making their own films, making their own programs. This kind of involvement is very natural to people in an electric world, because an electric world is one of circuits of integral loopings and feedback. The medium I employ is the probe, not the package. That is, I tend to use phrases, I tend to use observations that tease people, that squeeze them, that push at them, that disturb them, because I'm really exploring situations. I'm not trying to deliver some complete set of observations about anything.
I don't think he makes a decision. I don't think he commits himself, which, depending on your view of where our art is going, would either make him a potentially great artist or not one at all.
I'm an investigator. I explore, and instead of explaining, I explore.
Our time is a time for crossing barriers, for erasing old categories, for looking ahead.
The 19th century was the old machine age of fragmentation, literacy, and specialism. The one that the liberal mind has never got beyond. It's never studied the later environment. It's literate, visual, detached, non-involved. The visual man is the only detached human being that ever lived on this planet. All the other senses except sight, smell, hearing, touch, movement, these are involving. And they are discontinuous and unconnected. Only the electronic permits a total encounter with the discontinuous and the disconnected. The world of the discontinuity came in most vividly with the telegraph and the newspaper. The stories in the newspaper are completely discontinuous because they're simultaneous. They're all under one date line, but there's no storyline to connect them. TV is like that, of course. It's an X-ray mosaic screen with the light charging through the screen at the viewer. Joyce called it the charge of the light barricade. In fact, Finnegan's Wake is the greatest guide to the media ever devised on this planet, and is a tremendous study of the action of all media upon the human psyche and sensorium. But it's difficult to read. But it's worth it. Now, as we move our evolutionary process out into the environment itself, and instead of putting something inside, Darwin thought of man as inside an environment. It never occurred to Darwin that it would be possible to program the environment itself as evolutionary. Darwin is a literate 19th century man, and he had no intimation of the electronic information circuit or total human environment of information. So Teilhard de Chardin is a little more aware of the meaning of the electronic than Darwin could possibly have been. But that's a perfect example of the rearview mirror, this Darwinian obsession with man's thumbs, fingers, and appendages as biological evolution. This had, right in the midst of the great evolutionary step into the electronic circuitry, Darwin remains obsessed with this content of this old environment. What we're, of course, saying here is that If man is now in a position to program the total human environment as a teaching machine for the first time in human history, he's also in a position to exercise some reasonable choice and preference over the programming of that environment. That rational man may really get his first innings out of this computerized universe. Up till now, he's been a kind of little straw blown around by the technologies. One of the reasons why we can now notice these environments generated by new technologies is that they yield to one another so rapidly that it's almost impossible not to notice the changing of the scene or the guard or something. But no previous human age ever understood the effect of these human endeavors on the environment as they affected that age. They always understood the effect on the previous age, but never the effect on themselves. The history of utopias is the history of rearview mirrors. Every utopia is a picture of the preceding age, like Bonanza Land. There is never a utopia that copes with the present, any present. Man seems to have this built-in device of rearview mirrorism because he fears this confrontation with the total human environment. The only person who seems to habitually encounter and report on the new present is the artist. And whenever he passes in his report, he is at once branded as a kook, because the present is always unrecognizable, because it is not safe to look at. When one understands the operation of these new environments on our human equipment, it then becomes easy to predict and forecast the changes that will take place in many levels of programming, of even of entertainment.
Is one way of drawing attention to the fact that the new environments created by new media require a certain amount of human programming and control for our psychic life. Why should art and culture suddenly become very big business, like big science? The reasons are tied up with the fact that we're living in an information age. When you live in an information age, culture becomes big business, education becomes big business, and the cultural explosion or the information explosion becomes itself culture. It knocks down all the walls between culture and business, as between education and business. There's no longer any gap between the campus and the Wall Street or very big business. If anybody can participate in this whole area of exploration and discovery, and so I try to tease people and to urge them to get into these activities of discovery. Children love it. You can quickly get them going, because one reason being they sense that here is an area that in which I can become far more expert than my teacher.
Even when you put a movie on TV, those are not pictures. It still comes through as a charge of the light barricade. It's an involving mosaic situation in which the storyline or connected spaces are not there. The viewer has to supply them. That's how he gets involved. However, I'm not trying to present any programs of action or any directions of action. I'm merely trying to suggest ways of perceiving the situation we have developed for ourselves. I have, as I listened to Ralph, I was recalled another communication story about the two Navajo Indians who were having a little chat across the Arizona Valley by smoke signal. And midway through their chat, the AEC released an atomic charge, and when the big mushroom cloud cleared away, one of the Indians sent up a little smoke signal to the effect, "Gee, I wish I'd said that."
Television is directing our energies inward. Our children today are growing up as a kind of yogi, a Zen Buddhist bunch of inward-directed people looking seriously into themselves, not just idly selecting some exterior goal, but seeking for some completely meaningful identification with some great process. That's why Youth Peace Corps and so on appeals to children. It's not a job. It's a completely involving role. And so the television, I'd say, has had this extraordinary effect of driving Western man inward. Western man has triumphed over nature because he's been oriented outward at the visible world. And now with television, he is being oriented inward to the invisible world. And LSD is merely one little side issue in TV effects.
It was the funeral of President Kennedy that mostly proved the power of television to draw everyone into mass participation. The entire nation and world were simultaneously united in a single emotion and involvement.
Kennedy came into office as the first TV president with a resulting involvement on the part of all age groups in his whole presidency that was quite unexpected, and so that his assassination created a corresponding violence of response that was quite unexpected on all age groups and in many other parts of the world besides our own.
What type of presidential candidates will best lend themselves to television?
Oh, well, they have to be flexible, casual, Will Rogers-ish, Jack Parrish. They have to have a kind of informality and casualness that is suited to the medium. The more ramrodish, rigid types will just not go down with the TV viewing public at all. It's a sort of turning TV over to the casting bureaus, and politics, having become show business, is increasingly in the hands of the casting agencies. The Fellini and Bergman and such pull the storyline off the film, and the result is that you become much more profoundly involved in the film process. When you put a storyline on a novel or a film, you're much less involved. All right, the detective story. Edgar Allan Poe discovered, you see, that if you take the storyline off the detective story, the audience has to participate and make the story as it goes. And so, paradoxically, pull the storyline off any situation and you get a much higher level of creative participation on the part of the reader or the audience. And the Fellini 8.5 is a world where the audience has to work very hard, same as abstract art. Same as Picasso. Picasso has a picture of man sitting in chair. There's no man, there's no chair. What Picasso was painting was what it feels like for a man to be sitting in a chair. The audience has to work this out and participate in the experience of sitting in a chair instead of just visually identifying chair and man. The conflict going on in Vietnam has a corresponding conflict within ourselves. We have a hot war being reported on a cool medium, and it creates a great deal of distaste and reluctance in the population at large, which is very difficult for most people to understand. So, cool is involving, hot is not. My friend is fond of explaining that when he came to this part of New York, the cops told him, if you're ever in trouble, never shout help, shout fire. And he said, if you shout fire, all the windows will go up. If you shout help, you'll get nothing. Help is too involving. It demands too much from most people. They're afraid. Fire is not involving. It's a hot medium. You can throw a blanket, throw a bucket, and not be personally involved at all.
And so it's an extreme example of this strange conflict between hot and cool. But the movie medium is hot and loves violent events, just as the newspaper is hot and loves violent events. But the TV medium is so involving in the process of whatever's going on that it is cool, and it when it handles war and the sufferings of war, it creates an audience involvement which makes war most untakeable. So this Vietnam is our first TV war, and people are finding it not too much to their liking. It may be necessary to ban it altogether from TV from now on.
These are difficult times because we are witnessing a cataclysmic clash of two great technologies, the print technology of yesterday and the electric technology of today. We approach the new technology with the psychological conditioning and sensory responses of the old. We are faced with possible failure, the attempt to do a job demanded by the new environment with the tools of the old.
People have always been unaware of new environments because they're afraid of them. From the moment of birth, people sense that the environment, the new environment around them, is hostile. It's a real threat to their whole existence. And so every time an environment changes, we hasten to seek security and comfort in the old environment. I was delighted to come across a passage in Shakespeare a few days ago, a familiar passage, which suddenly revealed the same message. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin, that each with one consent pursues newborn gods, though they be made and molded of things past. The new is always made up of the old, or rather what people see in the new is always the old thing, the rearview mirror. And what people see at any time, what their attention is focused upon, is always the rearview mirror, never the present image or the present fact. The future of the future is the present, and this is something that people are terrified of.
Children love to get involved in making their own films, making their own programs. This kind of involvement is very natural to people in an electric world, because an electric world is one of circuits of integral loopings and feedback.
I was delighted to come across a passage in Shakespeare a few days ago, a familiar passage, which suddenly revealed the same message. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin, that each with one consent pursues newborn gods, though they be made and molded of things past. The new is always made up of the old, or rather what people see in the new is always the old thing, the rearview mirror. And what people see at any time, what their attention is focused upon, is always the rearview mirror, never the present image or the present fact. The future of the future is the present, and this is something that people are terrified of.